Hello and welcome again, everyone, to this edition of the Stride monthly webinar series. I am Angshuman Guin from Georgia Tech, and my co-presenter is Dr. Mohammed Hadi from Florida International University. We'll go ahead and get started. First, a few housekeeping items. To keep things moving, we will do the presentations first and then take questions in the last 10 minutes. Your mic should be muted by default, but as we go along, please feel free to keep posting your questions in the chat window. We'll get to them towards the end. You can find the chat window at the top of your screen in the slide out menu that appears when you hover your mouse on the edge of the screen. If you click on more, you will see the option of opening the chat window. So today we are presenting the results of a STRIDE project that was a joint effort between Georgia Tech, Florida International University, and Jackson State University. Georgia Tech, Florida International University, and Jackson State University are part of a consortium of 10 colleges and universities called the STRIDE Center. The STRIDE Center is the 2016 US DOT Region 4 Southeast University Transportation Center with the University of Florida as the lead institution. Our mission is to develop novel strategies for reducing congestion. My co-researchers on the study are Dr. Carrie Watkins and Dr. Michael Hunter, and the heavy lifting on the project was done by our PhD candidate, Rebecca Criezes. In this project, we looked at the impact of smartphone applications on trip routing and congestion management. The objectives of the project was to evaluate trip rerouting potential of navigation apps, to evaluate how drivers use this information, and to evaluate the impact of traffic rerouting on roadway facility usage, congestion, and prevailing speeds. Now, to understand why we are looking at these and why these are important in congestion management, let's take a step back and look at the current state of the role of data in traffic operations. To put things in perspective, just a decade ago, we were complaining about the lack of data. We were in a frenzy to collect more data so we can develop our key performance matrices and measure the performance of what we are doing and how efficiently we were doing things. But nowadays, the problem has somewhat shifted. With the advent of smartphone and the other small computers and devices pushing the boundaries on the ever-expanding Internet of Things, we have these fire hoses of data in our everyday life, and we are playing catch up to make sense of them all. In our microcosm of traffic operations and safety, the same is true. We have moved on from getting regular updates of traffic volumes and speeds to a plethora of different detection technologies. We have connection to the traffic signals. We have the real-time status of signals across the state. Every smartphone in a vehicle has essentially become a detector that is generating probe vehicle data that we can get from several data aggregators such as here, INRIX, Google, Waze, etc. And to add to that, we have the data that is going to flood us from the connected and autonomous vehicles in the not too distant future. It is probably time for us to do a reality check on how the flood of data is affecting traffic systems management and operations. The TISMO strategies provide us a toolkit to do several things to optimize traffic flow and maximize throughput on our capacity-constrained roadways. We have adaptive traffic signal control, dynamic lane reversal, hard shoulder running, variable speed limits, adaptive RAM metering, and so on and so forth. But a basic innate assumption in all of these is that the roadway users will use the information and respond in a predictable way. If we provide a queue warning, but the drivers do not slow down in anticipation of the stopped traffic ahead, that does not do us any good in avoiding crashes. If we try to aggressively meter a ramp to control the rate of flow of traffic onto the freeway, Waze might be leading traffic away from that ramp and increasing the congestion on the arterials. This brings us to the question as to what are the drivers really paying attention to? How are the information from the cloud service providers interacting with the information that is getting pushed to the drivers through the TISMO strategies. What is the effect of the information that users are getting via Waze and Google Maps and other such navigation apps? Is it really helping reduce overall delay by dynamically balancing traffic on the roadways? Is it reducing travel time variability? If you look at the plot at the bottom, it shows the average annual speeds on the northbound downtown connector in Metro Atlanta. While the effect varies across the region, for this particular segment of the roadway, it seems like the speeds have slowly but steadily decreased over time from 2012 to 2018. The chart at the top shows that the planning time index, which measures the variability in addition to the averages, experienced a similar increase over the years as well. Of course, the economy has been doing well over this period, and the traffic demand has correspondingly increased as well. On the other hand, there are concerns that the navigation apps are driving more traffic onto lower class roads, such as neighborhood streets. Also, these navigation apps do not necessarily consider traffic safety during the routing. They do not distinguish between a protected left turn and a permissive left turn, for an example. Depending on the traffic, Google will sometimes avoid a turn at a traffic signal and route you through a neighborhood street that opens up to a major arterial without the protection of a traffic signal. For example, in this figure, this turn onto Peachtree Street in Atlanta will require the driver to go across 4 lanes of traffic to make the left turn as suggested by this route. This increases the conflicts in the traffic and the exposure of the drivers to oncoming traffic, thereby creating a safety hazard. To take a closer look at these issues, we did a survey last year. We did several intercept surveys at the Streets Alive event, at the Piedmont Art Fair, and during football games at Georgia Tech, means all of these in the Metro Atlanta area. Our entire team of graduate students pitched in to administer the survey. We got responses from over 200 participants. We covered different demographics in these different venues. Here is a summary of the socio-demographic profile of the pooled sample across these different intercepts. The split was fairly equal between the male and female respondents. The sampling across the different age groups between 18 and 64 was also quite balanced. The education level of the respondents were fairly high, with the largest section of the population having at least a bachelor's degree, 42% there, and postgraduate of 40%. In the survey, we asked people about how they navigate. In the top left chart, you can see that 78% of the drivers said that they rely on smartphones for navigation. The bottom chart shows that 67% of the people surveyed used an iPhone. So our survey is slightly biased towards iPhone users, given that the base share of iPhones is only about 60%. The Venn diagram to the right shows that 48% of the app users use Google Maps and 36% use Waze. Next, we looked at how the drivers were using the navigation apps. Were they using it purely for routes where they did not know the roads? Or were they using it for traffic information on their regular commutes as well? The chart on the left shows the first time trips, 78%, and infrequent trips, 74%, are the two most common types of trips the users use the apps for. But almost half of the respondents did indicate, 46% here, that they use navigation apps for regular commute trips as well. So this finding has potential rerouting implications because we hypothesize that the drivers have a higher tendency to divert to alternate routes if they are more familiar with the route suggested. So in the figure on the right, it shows that not every trip is made with a navigation app. While 83% of the users use neighborhood roads, only 39% use an app while they are on a neighborhood road. While a larger share of the freeway users use an app during their travel, the percentage of users on major roads is slightly lesser, 74% versus 46%, and the percentage is lowest on the neighborhood streets. However, this does not mean that the drivers are not using neighborhood streets for cut-throughs. In addition to the survey, we collected Google location history data from some participants. In the Google location history data, we have individual GPS points for the individuals. When we plotted this data, we found several clear instances of cut-throughs being used by the drivers, as shown in this figure here. We'll talk more about the Google location history data in a bit, but let's come back to the survey. So we next tried to determine whether the drivers follow the directions provided by the apps and how effective is the information provided to them in affecting their route change behavior. The figure on the left shows that 25% of the users always take the rerouting suggestions without hesitation. About 46% of the drivers follow route change suggestions for more than 80% of their trips. But the remaining 30% of the people, the 4 bars on the right here, they are not so consistent about taking a route suggestion. In the pie chart on the right, we see that when users do not follow the suggested route, the primary reasons are because they prefer their typical route, this blue slice of 42%, or they do not trust the route, that is the orange slice of 33%. So this is one of my favorite slides. This clearly shows evidence that people cannot be expected to comply 100% of the time when you provide them with information with the route with potential time savings. So to further understand the rerouting potential, we asked the users about their preference for time savings required to accept a route change. Over 60% of the participants expressed that a 3 to 5 minute time savings would result in taking the recommended route. However, more than 6 minutes of time savings would be required for the other participants to change their route. Next, when we asked people whether they thought that the use of smartphone apps has caused an increase in the speed in the neighborhood streets, the results were quite interesting. So these green columns in these charts represent what people perceive about themselves, while the blue columns represent what they perceived about the behavior of the other road users, excluding themselves. So in the figure on the left, if we look at the fourth column pair, we see that while about 50 participants here agreed that the use of smartphone apps could have increased their driving speed in the neighborhood, about 90 of the participants felt that other people are speeding through neighborhoods because of the navigation apps. So we also asked if the apps had a more positive effect, if people are less focused on finding their way, are they more aware of the surroundings and more alert while they're driving on the neighborhood roads. So in the figure on the right, if you look at the second column pair, we see that about 100 participants said that they think that it has decreased alertness of other drivers, the blue column here, while only 60 participants agreed that their own alertness might have decreased. So as part of the survey, we also asked people for their Google location history data. So although a survey can capture the stated travel behavior and preferences, the spatiotemporal location history can reveal the actual travel behavior. So through a face-to-face survey, participants who responded to the survey about navigation use had the option of providing 4 months of smartphone location data for the months of March 2017, April 2017, March 2018, and April 2018. Um, we provided a small incentive as $10 Amazon gift card to try to incentivize them to provide us this data. So these months were chosen because of the relationship with the I-85 bridge collapse in Atlanta, Georgia, and the associated increase or hypothesized increase in navigation app usage. So the participants were asked to log into their Google account on a secure research laptop, click a link on the survey webpage that would automatically download the specified smartphone location data stored on their Google account. And then they were asked to log out of their account to ensure no further access for the researchers to their account. So this was a one-time data download of 4 months of data. The data was downloaded in a KML format with attributes including timestamp, lat long, calculated activity, and the distance traveled. So the eligible participants that were willing to provide the Google location history data for the study were definitely challenging to recruit. Only 11% of the questionnaires resulted in Google location history data collection. A limited factor for the number of data downloads was the process eligibility, which was restricted to Android users with location services enabled on their smartphone. So only 25% of the questionnaire respondents were eligible to participate in the data collection. The sample size is somewhat small. We got usable data from about 27 people, which is kind of understandable from the privacy concerns perspective. So, but the average number of trips downloaded per respondent was about 542 trips with a minimum and maximum of 1 and 982 trips respectively. So while the data collected was too small to do a comprehensive validation of the stated preferences, we were able to do an aggregate level analysis. So using 17 respondents here, this 15 plus 2, 17 respondents that had more than 90 days of data available, about 15,000 trips were analyzed over the 4-month period to observe trends in routes over time. The top left chart here shows the number of days with the relevant data in the trimmed Google location history dataset. The overall number of days took a dip in April of 2017 here, just after the event, when people in the Metro Atlanta region were asked to minimize their commutes and telecommute as much as possible. Otherwise, the number of days is fairly stable. The chart at the bottom shows that while the percentage of trips on the freeways, this left block here, while the percentage of trips on the freeways here and the major roads were fairly consistent throughout the affected months, the percentage of trips on the neighborhood roads increased in the immediate aftermath of the incident in April of 2017. And it came down back in the control months of March and April of 2018. So the figure on this on the right shows this a little more clearly. This presents the location history of these same 17 respondents within a 5-mile radius around the 85 bridge collapse. The road facility types are given distinct colors to visually see the change in facility usage across the 4 months. The bridge collapse event happened on March 30th of 2017. So comparing March and April data of 2017, we see an obvious increase in the use of the arterials, as seen by the increase in the width of the orange lines in the top 2 figures. When you compare the right figure to the left, you see a little more orange here. However, if you look at the comparison data in the bottom 2 figures for March and April of 2018, you will notice that the traffic on the non-freeway roads did come down, but they probably did not come down all the way, especially for these users of smartphone navigation. So again, we admit that we have a fairly small sample here. So the orange lines here are still thicker than the line in March of 2017. While the sample size is too small to make a definitive conclusion here, it does indicate that there is a possibility that this event increased the propensity of users to use non-freeway routes more frequently than before. So in summary, in this study, we certainly see empirical evidence, especially from the stated preference survey, where we have a much more robust data set. We see that the smartphone applications have changed the routing behavior of drivers. It is therefore important for us to acknowledge that the TISMO strategies we are using are not really working in isolation, but there is a dynamic feedback loop which complicates the optimization because there is a constant evolution in the operation in play. Right? As we move forward with developing and implementing strategies for improving safety and mobility on our roadways, we need to accommodate for this dynamic nature of the rerouting induced by this real-time information available to the system users via these navigation apps or otherwise. The situation becomes even more relevant with the advent of the connected vehicles, which brings with it the opportunity to leverage this data to deploy forward-looking predictive strategies that account for dynamic rerouting. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Hadi.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Gwen. And I'm going to present our part, as Gwen mentioned, Georgia Tech and FIU and Jackson State University were working on this project. And in our part, I'm going to present mainly on the work that we did as a part of the effort funded by the STRIDE UTC, but also a little bit, couple of slides on a matching project that was funded by the FDOT. And the team that work on this is, we have 3 PhD students that work on this project and the matching project, Tahneen Tariq, Rajib Saha, and Mahmoud Arafat. And then Dr. Shahadat Iqbal, who is a postdoctoral researcher and research associate in FIU. So, I'm trying to get to, yeah. So what we have done as part of this effort, I think an interesting part of this effort is to compare different methods of estimating diversion. And basically, we use detector data. We use also online, not online and offline here. This is a mistake. I think it's in-person survey and online survey. And basically, those surveys follow the same type of questions that were used in Georgia Tech surveys. And the comparison of the finding from this, I think, is very interesting. So we use Southeast Florida as a case study in Fort Lauderdale area and some in Miami area. So the prediction of the diversion rate based on detector data, we have, ideally we should use tracking of the cars, as Gwen mentioned, maybe connected vehicle or prop vehicles, whatever that data is available. Unfortunately, we don't have a big market penetration of that. We didn't have access to it in a cost-effective manner. And then if we don't have that, we at least hope to have detectors on the off-ramps, but many deployment of ITS in Florida and other parts of the nation does not have detectors installed on the off-ramps, although we think that they should be installed on the off-ramps rather than just on the main line and sometimes on the on-ramps when there is a ramp metering. So what we did, we utilized a main detector, and we applied method to estimate the diversion using the cumulative volume diagrams, and then combine that with cluster analysis and predictive supervised machine learning to estimate the divergence. So the cluster analysis was used to basically associate the incident days before the incident happened with similar normal day without incident. And the idea there is if we compare those incident days with days that are similar to them but without incidents, we will be able to find out the difference in volume, and from that we figure out how much is the diversion. And then once we estimate the diversion using that combination of cluster analysis and a cumulative volume analysis, we use machine learning, three different types of machine learning to estimate the diversion, as I'm going to present in my slide. So with the cluster analysis, we clustered the conditions every 30 minutes. In that aspect, we applied the methodology that is normally used with cluster analysis to determine the optimal number of clusters. And based on that, we select we found out that 4 to 5 clusters are sufficient to basically group the days or the pattern during the AM peak. And they range from lower congestion to heavy congestion. And then in the what we did once we did the clustering analysis, we associated, as I said, the normal day with the incident day, and then we used the cumulative diagram that we normally use when we do queuing analysis. And basically, the idea with the queuing theory and the cumulative diagram that uses part of the queuing theory is that if you look at the left, normally you expect once the queue is dissipated, then the departure will be coming back to the condition when it is basically expected if there are no incidents. But it will delay that dissipation of or that volume. It will delay it in the queue until the queue totally dissipates, and then they will meet the point where we expect the queue to be dissipated. They meet with the normal day volume. However, if you look at the right side, when there is diversion, then once the queue is dissipated, we see that the volume was not back to normal as a normal day, but there will be a gap between the two, and that gap will if you look at it at many incidents, large number of incidents, you will be able to estimate for a certain type of incident how much is the congestion level. So this kind of a low-cost option, if you don't have any other data like probe vehicle data or detector data on the off-ramps, then this method is, we developed this method as an alternative. Once we did that, then we, as I mentioned, we did 3 different types of machine learning and statistical analysis. And showing here just a simple regression model to show what are the what are the factors that influence the diversion. And you can see that came significant is the number of lane blockage on the freeway, the incident severity, which is normally coded in the incident database, the incident location, and the time that the incident happened. What we found interestingly is that during the AM peak, for example, in the early part of the AM peak, there is more diversion in percentage-wise than later in the peak, and we explained that by the fact that when you get into congested conditions, the percentage-wise, you will not be able to get people out of the freeway because the ramps will be totally occupied and their capacity is totally used. So in that aspect, that's something that agencies should consider when they to update their signal timing to allow more people, although more people desire to divert, they would not be able to divert due to the constraints on the off-ramp capacities. As I mentioned, we use a neural network, we use support vector machine, and we use linear regression, and we compare their ability to predict, and we found out that the support vector machine and the linear the neural network produce a little bit better fit to the data, especially for some patterns, better fit to the data than the regression, and somewhat lower error than the statistical regression analysis. We also, on the matching project, we have done another type of deep learning neural network to predict the impacts on the alternative routes in terms of what movement or what direction gets impacted by the incident, and we found out that also there the incident attribute, traffic state on the freeway, travel time on both the freeway and alternative routes come to be significant, and this can be used to support agency to adjust the traffic signal timing. In fact, we put that into simulation, and we predict how much will be the impact of a special signal timing plan in terms of improvement, and especially for the critical turns that the diverted traffic want to make. So normally those would have a limitation on their maximum, and those movements will not be able to pass them through, creating long queues. But when we implemented a special signal timing plan, we were able to resolve those. We then did a survey similar to the one that, in fact, we took the survey that Georgia Tech developed, and we have used it in South Florida, both in face-to-face and online. And we wanted to compare. So our detected data show 4% to 10% almost average diversion, depending on the incident type. In terms of the 95th percentile, they are almost 8% to 22%. So we want to see, does that go with what people have been telling us? And what we got is 315 responders to the online survey and 41 responses to the in-person survey. And as the case with Georgia, with Atlanta area, we found out in South Florida, again, expected Google Map is most widely used, and Waze second, and Apple Map. And then what we found out in the bottom, you can see that almost 60%, if you take the almost daily and at least once a week, almost 60% use it at least once a week, based on both on the person survey and on the online survey. Only 10 to 20% told us that they are not using it or rarely using it. In the survey, if you look at what they told us about diversion in the last 33 months, and it will be interesting to compare this, and we're planning to fuse the data from Georgia and Florida to see the differences in what we were told. But you can see that it is kind of similar to what in Georgia, but it is showing that 35 to 40% said that they divert almost 40% of the time, or better, or more, and that seems to be much higher than what our detector data is showing us. Only 10 to 30% indicate that they do a small diversion in the past 3 months. They have done small diversion in the past 3 months. So there are indications that these type of surveys, in fact, these are the revealed preference surveys. even not stated. In the past, they said revealed preference survey is much better than stated preference survey. But it seems like even these sometimes overestimate the diversion, and this is something that needs to be investigated more even in future studies. And based on also what we were told, it appeared that as similar to what Gwen, I think, was talking about, that with 13 to 18 minute incidents or more, you have, or less, 13 or 18 minutes or less, you still have about 60 to 80% of the people divert, even if they save 13 to 18 minutes for an hour trip, and if they save 7 to 12, it is about 35, 7 to 12 minutes, the diversion is 30% to 35%, according to the survey, while the diversion based on detector data showing that there is 1 to 5% in about 60% of the incident, only 1 to 5%. But maybe the people, when they think about the incident, they think, when they respond to this survey, they think about the most severe type of the incident rather than just one lane blockage that lasts for 15 minutes. They may be thinking of the one that lasts for 1 hour or something like that. So that may be a reason, but I think this should need to be looked at more, because most of the research up to this point has been depending on revealed preference survey or stated preference survey. Impact on use of road class or the use of those classes, and we see that in Florida, at least, seemed like the use of the all of the road classes we see increase in their or change in their use with the diversion, due to diversion. So, but it's more on the freeways and roads and on major roads, but some on the neighborhood streets too. And I think this also needs to be investigated further, as Gwen was talking about, the fact that some of those will result in diversion to minor roads is of concern, because you're going to go to residential neighborhood, and it is, I think, area specific. So for example, I have driven in Atlanta several times, and when you drive in Atlanta, Atlanta really does not have good major roads as alternative roads. So when you put in Google Maps, it will take you definitely to residential areas. While in South Florida, even in Miami, but more in Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach, you have a more structured network with parallel arterials and parallel freeways. So in those cases, I would expect less recommendation to divert to neighborhood roads than what is happening in Atlanta. And that concludes my slides. I think we're going to open to any questions that you may have that you can ask us either in person or in the chat. But meanwhile, I just want to mention that also in the chat there's a link to a survey. We appreciate if you can fill this survey to help us plan our future webinars. Our next webinar will be, I think maybe you can start with the question. Our next webinar is by Dr. Ali Thomas from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and her presentation is 2000 Millennial Uber, Initial Finding from North Carolina, and the webinar will be on February 12, 2020. So, Gwen, do you want to open to questions if there is any question from the audience?
So we'll wait a couple of minutes to see if there are any questions. And again, if you have any questions, please type it in the chat window. All right. I still don't see any questions. Mohammed, any concluding thoughts? Or?
No, Gwen, I think it would be interesting to compare the behavior, the changing in behavior between cities. I think that would be something that we should explore further. And I think the fact that you started looking at mobile and probe vehicle kind of, and we start looking at the detectors, I think it is very interesting to start looking at these technologies, and especially emerging technologies, and providing this type of information versus the traditional way of us doing behavioral analysis based on stated and revealed preference surveys.
Yeah, it is somewhat interesting in the fact that although we used pretty much the same survey questionnaire here, as our focus on the study, means we were driving the participants towards answering the questions from the perspective of a navigation app usage. Whereas I think your survey was more focused on the diversion part. So it's interesting, means how the numbers are kind of somewhat different based on how on what the focus of the survey was.
Yeah, and there are different audience for both, and or sometimes different, sometimes the same audience are interested in the both sides of the coin. But I think it's good. It's interesting that both were covered. I see a question from Pang Zhou. Any suggestion how to separate effect of using cell phone application for diversion from just normal diversion? That's a very good question. This is always obviously the way to, if we have sufficient data, then what we would have to go is to look at a time series, and in addition to, of course, to reveal the preference survey where we ask people, did you divert because of the phone? And I think a lot of the answers were yes, we diverted because of the phone. So that answered that part. Now, if you want to look at data, I think you would have to look at the time series of the increase in using smartphone apps versus the diversion, and this type of data is not available. So you have to use revealed preference survey. I don't know, Gwen, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the way to do this would be to go back 10 years and look at the diversion rates around that time, and see if there is a significant difference between the diversion rates 10 years ago, when the smartphones were not being used so much for navigation. So yes, people already had smartphones, but the navigation apps and the data was probably not that popular about 10, 15 years ago. And if we compare the time series, as you said, of the change in the diversion rates there at that time versus now, that will give us an idea of what we can attribute to normal diversion. But again, right now, if you look at the data for now, this is very much confounded. When you are getting the same information from a message sign as well as from a navigation app. So a lot of times people just confirm the information, see that, okay, both things are telling me to do this diversion, so they will do that. So the signals are kind of confounded here. It's very difficult to clearly distinguish that.
Okay.
Okay, I think we'll call it a day.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening in. I hope that was useful. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Mohammed or I, and we are available over email or phone. Okay. All right. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.